Hi there, it's Unicorn, and I'm here today to talk about the books that I read so far this year. I wanted to say that it's been a long time, but I kind of feel that I already said so in the second last video. So just know that I had a very busy the first 3 months of the year, and I'm very happy that I finally got time to record more videos. I read 10 things in January, and February and March together, I only finished one book. So the majority of the books that I'm going to talk about today are all from January, and without further ado, let's dive into the wrap-up. The first book I read was Normal People by Sally Rooney. I did a full review of this book, I will link it down below, and it has been longlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction this year recently, and I love it so much. The book was about soulmate but without the cheesiness. Mary and Connor are friends and lovers from high school. They knew each other very well, but they also need to deal with the challenge of the imbalance of their power on each other and also the imbalance of their social status. The story was appealing but also heartbreaking. I was grilled the whole time when I read this book. I planned to read it in a week, but I ended up finished it in 2 days. I think that could tell something. I do think one of the many plots in this book was unnecessary, but it was so minor and I don't think it will affect the enjoyment of this book. So I still really love it and I highly recommend it if you want a very appealing story. The second book was a Japanese detective novel that was translated into Chinese, The Night Stranger, 一帮骑士 by Soji Shimada, Dao Tian Zhuangsi, and I will put the Japanese title and the author here. The book has a very peculiar story. Started with a man losing all his memories and wake up in the public, but somehow the only thing he remembered was to find his car. And then he met some strangers and wanted to spend more time with them, but little did he know he was trapped into something so dark. As the usual style of the author, although the story has a mystery going on, it was so delightful and relaxing. One of my favorite detectives in the fiction world, Mitadai Ikiyoshi, was also in this book. He's very odd and sometimes do very uncommon behavior, but yet very sharp. I loved every book he was in, so I really enjoyed this one. The third thing that I read or listened to was not really a book. It's an Audible original, and I think it's a short version of an audiobook in the format of podcast. And it is called The Last Days of August by John Rawson. This is the record of the author's investigation of the sudden death of the porn star called August. And this recorded how the author tried to uncover the mystery behind the sudden death. I don't think this is a very thoroughly investigation, but it has provided a lot of information of how porn industry was worked and a lot of the unspoken rules. I feel like I learned something from it given that I know nothing about the industry, and it was interesting in that way. But I wouldn't say it provided a lot of high quality information because I feel like a lot of the conclusion was drawn by the author's personal opinion without further details. The next book I read was I'll Be Gone in the Dark by Michelle McNamara. And this is the book about Michelle's investigation about the Golden State Killer, and I think it's paid more attention to how Michelle was tracking the Golden State Killer and also Michelle's passion towards true crime cases. The book was chilling because the case was so horrifying, and every clue Michelle got was detailed in the book. And also, it is a very emotional book given that we know Michelle has passed away before the Golden State Killer was caught. And I kept wondering how Michelle would want to edit the book if she know the ending. And even though the book was unfinished and you can feel the incompleteness, it is still very valuable. And I read it or listened to it on a road trip in California, and it was very scary. So if you want to read this book, just be sure it's light outside. Following, I read The Faster I Walk, The Smaller I Was by Shashki Skonsrud. And this is a book about a old lady who has lived very long and she feels like she has completed nothing but longevity. This was also a story about how an extremely introverted person tries to fit into a lot of social situations and how a old lady who was retired for a long time tried to find the remaining purpose in her life. I had mixed feeling about this book. On one hand, it described the insecurity of a person very well, but on the other hand, it was too slow and sometimes rambly. I don't mind a slow story, but I feel like this book was lack of the tension to catch my attention. So I give it 3 stars. Still good, but not for everybody. And following, I have the first 5-star rating of the year, Educated by Tara Westover. This book was super hyped on BookTube, and it has its reasons. Tara Westover was raised in the survivalist family where her parents did not believe in public education, public service, or anything connected to the government. She was extremely abused in her childhood, and she hasn't been to school until she was 17. Her story was very bizarre. To survive in such a tough environment, she adapted to a lot of unusual rules in her family and educated herself even though her parents was against that. And finally, she got into college and ended up being a PhD in Cambridge. Her life was very inspiring to me, and her writing style was so smooth and articulate that you couldn't tell that she hasn't had a formal education. I think I will do a full review of this book because I have so much more to say. And the next book I have read was also a 5-star rating for me, and this is 房思琪的初恋乐园, 房思琪's First Love Paradise by Lin Yihan. This is a story about a girl who was raped by a teacher she once looked up to, and she couldn't deal with the trauma, so she made herself fall in love with the teacher. The book was brutal and with a lot of discussions about the relationship between literary expression and people's feeling. He also believed in the saying by Confucius, which is, fine words has an insinuating appearance and are seldom associated with true virtue. 文字巧言令色. And this book shows that. The writing was lyrical. You can tell the author has a solid background of literature, and she inherited a very traditional and also very poetic way of Chinese writing. So it was such an enjoyment. But the sad story about this book was, it was based on the real experience of the author, and she suicided after this book got public. And then I read a non-fiction. It was Quiet by Susan Chen. And it's supposed to be a discussion about how introverted person going to survive in this very extroverted world. However, it has not many things that was new to me because I'm an introverted person, so I already knew a lot of them. And also, I feel like the author felt to discuss the uniqueness of each individual and put them roughly into big categories and oversimplified a lot of phenomena. And there wasn't many scientific proof or evidence to support the author's conclusion, so I did not enjoy this book. I give it 2 stars. And I also have a complaint about the audiobook because it is either too loud sometimes or too low sometimes, and you need to constantly adjust the volume, and it is not good for an audiobook. And then I read City by Courtney Summers. This is a book recommended to me by Alex over at Alex Black, and this is a YA mystery. Me and Alex has a lot of taste in common in terms of adult fiction, and we didn't know that if I would like a YA novel that she enjoyed, but it turned out to be true, and I enjoyed this book so much. This is a story about a girl called City tracking down the killer of her sister, and she went missing because of that. And it follows 2 characters. One is City, and one is a journalist who tracked the missing girl case. I liked a written review of this book. It described the book so much better than me, and it was written by Hannah from the channel From Beginning to Bookends. So I will leave the link of the review and her channel down below as well. Second to the last, I have another Audible original. It's called Power Moves: Lessons from Davos by Adam Grant. This is a series of interviews that Adam Grant took when he attended Davos. The main idea of this piece was the power are shifting from the traditional big heads of the companies and politicians to the individuals who act as influencers. And to be honest, I don't remember a lot of things besides that, but I give it 4 stars on Goodreads, so it must have something that I found interesting. But do I plan to revisiting it and rediscovering the interesting things? I don't think so. And the last book I finished in the first 3 months was called 都挺好, All is Well by An Nai. And this book I read over one night because it has been adapted into a Chinese drama, and I have watched the first 2 episodes of it and I couldn't wait for the rest, so I read the book instead. It's about the smallest daughter in Sue's family who was treated so badly growing up, and she decided to break up with her family when she was 18. But 10 years later, their mother, who was also the reason why she was treated so unfairly, has passed away. So she somehow reconnected with her family. But again, she needed to find the balance of dealing with family members and also the peace in herself. This book shows the complexity of family life. To some people, it may be too dramatic, but to the others, it is just reality. But to be honest, because I read it so quickly, all my attention was on the plot, so I forgot the feelings to the writing ends of this book. But I think it is way better than the TV adaptation. And that's all the books that I read from January to March. And now I'm currently working on the long list of the Women's Prize for Fiction, and I try the long list every year but failed every year. So let's see what's gonna happen this year. And again, I'm so happy I'm back and film video again, and I hope you enjoyed this video. I will be back with my roughly regular schedule. So happy reading. I'll see you in my next bookish video. Bye!